We're going to take a look real briefly here at how to code functions within programming. Functions give us that ability to handle code that we want to repeat a bunch of times with by simplifying down how much code we actually have inside the program. So the function itself has 4 different parts. You first have to type the word private. We're not going to, in Visual Basic at least, use any public functions that can be accessed from different code. If we need to switch that word at a time, then we will. But for right now, we're just going to stick with private. You're going to hit the space. Then you're going to type the word function. So those first 2 parts never change. The third part, which depends on what you want to call it, give the function a name for it to be referred to throughout the program. Now, for naming a function, we do want to use camel casing, and notice how there are not any spaces in between. This final portion then set the parameters as needed. If there are no parameters, leave the parentheses blank. So we have the ability, what parameters are, is the ability to give the function certain information that we need for it to fully operate. Without the information, it will not operate correctly. If it does not need any information to operate correctly, then leave the parentheses blank. So here's 2 quick examples. The one on the left here is functions without a function without parameters. So it's a blank parenthesis, and you can see that the rest of the function sets up the same, where we have code, and then we have a return statement, which we'll talk about in a second. And then we also have functions with parameters on the right-hand side. Now, inside the parameters here, we have 4 parts to the parameter, which we'll get to on the next slide. Okay, so rules with parameters. Remember, parameters are the information needed from other sections of the program to make the function work. So this is a little harder to describe because there's no complete concrete recipe to know how to make this work. So we're going to try and keep the projects pretty simple for that. So for example, if a function is designed to compare 2 numbers, it needs to receive both of those numbers so then it can do the proper comparison. So it would receive 2 different integers, for example, and return the greater one depending on which one it is. If the function will work completely by itself without receiving any information, such as updating an object or updating a list box or text file, which we'll get into this quarter, then it does not need any parameters. The 4 parts to the parameter. Now this is just the information inside of the parentheses. 2 out of 4 of the words are going to be the same no matter what. By val means to accept it by its current value. So that's the first part we type. The variable name is the second type, and this is where a lot of people get confused because it's a generic variable name for this particular function. Variables named within the function only stick to that function. So it is perfectly acceptable to have a variable named number in a button and have another variable named number in this function as a receiver for the information. But both of those are perfectly acceptable. As always has been our third word, and then type equals the type of variable being passed down. So if you see our 2 examples down below the picture, we have by val number as integer or by val money as double. We could also do our strings and our booleans, or we could also pass down objects as well. So if we had a checkbox, we could pass down a checkbox and check its particular state, whether it's checked or not. Lots of different things we can do through functions. And it is also possible in that same sense to have a function with just 1 parameter or have as many parameters as we want to. What we have to do there is simply separate it by a comma to get the information down to the function. So if we're receiving two variables, such as our number comparison example, our first number would be in the first variable, our second number would be with the second variable. The process of naming them is still the same, you just separate it with a comma in between. And then finally, we've seen the example of the return statement. So the function can either return a numerical value. Again, our comparison example, it will return the greater of the two numbers to the user. Or, if it's updating something, then we could just simply have it return nothing. It does still need in Visual Basic that return statement that says return something. And if that's not the case, then we have it say return nothing.